Operation Highjump was one of the biggest Antarctic missions ever launched by the United States Navy, and what it found was ice, weather, data, and hard limits, not aliens. That matters because the real story is already huge, dramatic, and strange enough without hidden civilizations, flying machines, or secret polar battles. The expedition took place in 1946 and 1947, right after World War II, when cold weather knowledge had military, scientific, and political value. Its official name was the United States Navy Antarctic Development Program, 1946 to 1947, and it was not a tiny hidden side project. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd was the officer in charge, and Rear Admiral Richard H. Cruzen commanded the task force in the field. The scale alone helped create later myths, because the operation involved about 4,700 personnel, 13 ships, and roughly 24 aircraft. That kind of force sounds like the opening to a conspiracy movie, but the records show practical goals instead of supernatural ones. Today we are looking at what the Navy really wanted, what it actually found, why the mission ended when it did, and how the alien stories got attached later. The first key question is why the Navy would send such a large mission to Antarctica at all. The answer begins with a practical post-war problem: how do ships, aircraft, vehicles, clothing, fuel, radios, and people perform in brutal polar conditions? The Navy wanted real field answers, not guesses from a desk, because Antarctica is one of the harshest operating environments on Earth. Cold weather capability mattered for survival, mapping, meteorology, long-range aviation, logistics, and possible future bases in remote regions. This was also a time when nations cared a lot about strategic reach, territorial posture, and proving they could operate in difficult places. So Highjump was not a fringe adventure. It was a serious test of what American military power and organization could actually do in the far south. The official goals were specific and grounded, and they explain what the mission actually discovered. One goal was to train personnel and test equipment in frigid conditions where normal assumptions often fail very quickly. Another goal was to investigate whether large bases and airfields could be established, maintained, and used on Antarctic ice. There was also a goal tied to sovereignty, extending American presence over the largest practical area, though later retellings treated that more carefully. The mission also aimed to expand hydrographic, geographic, geological, meteorological, and electromagnetic knowledge of the region. And one of the most visible tasks was extensive aerial photography and mapping, because huge areas of Antarctica were still poorly documented. When you line up those goals together, the picture changes from secret war to giant field laboratory mixed with strategic planning. What the Navy found was not a hidden race underground. It found data about ice, machines, weather, routes, and human endurance. That data was valuable because Antarctica punishes even small mistakes, and large military systems break in very expensive ways when the cold wins. The task force established Little America 4, a base on the Ross Ice Shelf area, and used it to support flights and surface work. Aircraft launched reconnaissance missions, photographed major stretches of coastline, and helped improve understanding of the Antarctic operating environment. Helicopters were also tested in polar conditions, which is an often overlooked detail because rotary aircraft were still fairly new in military use. That is exactly the kind of practical finding the Navy cared about, not fantasy objects in the sky, but what machines could and could not do in extreme cold. There was also a very real tragedy during the mission, and it probably helped later myths sound more believable to people. On December 30th, 1946, a Martin PBM Mariner seaplane called George I crashed during a reconnaissance flight in Antarctica. 3 crew members were killed, and survivors faced severe conditions before rescue, showing how dangerous the expedition truly was, even without any conspiracy. A deadly crash in a remote white landscape gives later rumor makers emotional fuel, because audiences sense that something terrible really did happen. Something terrible did happen? But it was an aviation disaster in extreme weather, not a battle with unknown craft. Another big question is why the operation ended sooner than some conspiracy stories expected, and this part is less mysterious than people think. Antarctica itself is a powerful explanation because weather, sea ice, mechanical strain, and the short polar summer limit what any expedition can do. Plans in Antarctica often shrink, routes change, aircraft get damaged, and safety decisions force early withdrawal even during well-organized missions. Stopping or shortening a mission in that environment is not proof of hidden contact, it is proof that Antarctica is brutally hard. Highjump also needs to be placed in its real historical setting, just after World War II and before the Cold War fully hardened. Some people describe it as a direct anti-Soviet show of force, but that can overstate the evidence if we say it too strongly. A better way to put it is that the United States had obvious reasons to study polar logistics, navigation, communications, and basing feasibility after the war. That strategic logic is real, even if the later language of full Cold War confrontation had not yet reached its later shape. The mission was also part of a wider pattern. States were interested in remote zones, scientific prestige, and the practical value of hard environments. Highjump therefore fits normal history much better than paranormal history, even if the setting feels built for legend. The expedition generated a vast photographic and observational record, though exact totals are reported differently in different summaries. What stays consistent across sources is the scale of the mapping effort and the amount of practical knowledge gained. That knowledge fed into later polar missions and helped shape future American operations in Antarctica. This is important because Highjump did not stand alone like a secret disaster that everyone tried to bury forever. It was followed by more Antarctic efforts, including Operation Windmill and later Operation Deep Freeze, creating a clear chain of continued polar work. That continuity is one of the strongest arguments against the alien story because secret catastrophe stories usually need a dramatic break, not a normal program sequence. So how did hidden civilization and flying saucer claims get attached to a documented Navy mission about cold weather capability and mapping? Part of the answer is Admiral Byrd himself, who was already a legendary polar figure and easy to turn into a mythic hero. Another part is Antarctica, which feels remote, empty, and secretive to people who will never see it with their own eyes. Remote places invite imagination, and imagination grows even faster when the landscape is white, silent, and difficult for outsiders to verify. Post-war rumors also mix together in powerful ways, with Nazi survival stories, hidden base legends, and older Hollow Earth ideas feeding one another. Later sensational writers then selected or distorted bits of Byrd material to suggest discoveries that contemporary records never actually document. The great size of the task force made that easy because many people assumed a mission this big had to be hiding a bigger secret purpose. But when historians look at the evidence, they keep finding the same grounded picture: orders, logistics records, newsreel footage, official summaries, and personnel accounts. Those sources describe training, mapping, science, base planning, weather observation, and operational testing under savage environmental pressure. They do not show credible evidence of alien contact, advanced flying enemy craft, or an entrance to some inner Earth world. In other words, the story becomes less exciting only if you think real history needs fantasy to matter. The truth is that thousands of people, 13 ships, and around 24 aircraft were pushed into one of Earth's harshest regions to learn what was possible. That experiment revealed a lot about geography, ice conditions, flight operations, survival, engineering failure, and the limits of military organization. Those limits matter because modern viewers often imagine huge states as nearly unstoppable, but Antarctica humbled powerful institutions very quickly. A place can defeat ambition without firing a shot, and Highjump is a strong example of that reality. The mission showed that building and sustaining large operations in extreme cold demanded far more than courage and hardware. It required weather knowledge, timing, communication, durable equipment, trained crews, and respect for a continent that punishes overconfidence. That is a better lesson than the alien version because it teaches us something true about power and environment. The debunking line that fits best is simple: Highjump became a perfect myth machine because it was large, remote, strategic, and hard for most people to picture clearly. Those are exactly the conditions that allow folklore to grow on top of ordinary records until the records become harder to hear. But the records are still there, and they are far less mysterious than the rumors suggest. They point to a post-war Antarctic expedition focused on testing, training, mapping, and knowledge gathering during a brief window of southern summer operations. They include human loss, equipment stress, and hard decisions, which is more than enough drama without borrowing from science fiction. If someone tells you Highjump found aliens, ask what archival evidence supports that claim, because the credible record keeps pointing the other way. If someone says the mission proves hidden civilizations, ask why the follow-up programs look like ordinary continuation instead of emergency cover-up. And if someone says the operation ended early because the Navy was defeated by unknown forces, remember that sea ice and weather defeat people all the time. Antarctica itself is more than capable of cutting plans short without any secret enemy at all. So what did the Navy actually find at the bottom of the world? It found cold weather truths about machines, maps, airfields, survival, and geography. It found the operational cost of working in deep isolation, and it found that even giant task forces answer to the climate. That may sound less flashy than alien saucers, but it is far more useful, far more believable, and far more supported by the evidence. And, in a strange way, the real story is still unsettling, because it reminds us how little control powerful nations can have in extreme environments. Highjump was not the discovery of another world, it was the discovery of just how hard this world already is. That is why the mission still matters today, because it shows how strategy, science, and raw environment collide in a place almost nobody can dominate fully. It also shows why huge government operations can look mysterious from a distance even when their paperwork is surprisingly ordinary up close. Most legends need empty space to grow, and Antarctica provided one of the largest empty spaces in the public imagination. But empty space in the imagination is not the same thing as empty archives, and the archives give us ships, aircraft, orders, crashes, bases, and surveys. They give us a difficult operation with clear goals instead of a secret war with impossible machines. They also remind us that real exploration usually produces measurements, maps, weather reports, maintenance problems, and exhausted crews more often than miracles. When you understand that, the strange power of Highjump becomes easier to see because it was important without needing anything supernatural at all. It mattered to navigators because charts and coastal knowledge reduce guesswork in places where guesswork can kill crews. It mattered to engineers because cold changes how machines behave, how fuel flows, how metal responds, and how maintenance must be planned. It mattered to pilots because ice runways, weather windows, visibility, and range limits decide whether flights return safely or vanish into white distance. It mattered to planners because a base on paper is easy, but a base in Antarctic conditions demands shelter, supplies, timing, and constant adaptation. Those are exactly the kinds of findings that rarely become popular legends, even though they are the real output of large expeditions. People usually want buried cities and secret enemies, while history often gives us logistics, weather, and exhausted teams learning expensive lessons. But logistics and weather shaped the 20th century more often than fantasy ever did, and Highjump is a strong reminder of that fact. The operation also shows why myth grows faster than paperwork, because paperwork feels ordinary even when it records extraordinary effort. A manifest, a flight report, or a maintenance note does not look thrilling at first glance, yet those documents tell us what the mission was actually doing. They show repeated concern with terrain, survival, air operations, mapping, and environmental knowledge instead of hidden combat. So the best way to read Highjump is not as a coded alien story, but as a real test of whether human systems could function at the edge of the map. And the answer was mixed. They could do a lot, but Antarctica still imposed strict limits on speed, safety, and ambition. That mixed answer is honest history, and honest history is often more impressive than legend, because it shows achievement and failure at the same time. Highjump succeeded in producing knowledge, but it also exposed how quickly environment can humble giant plans. That combination of ambition and limit is exactly what makes the real mission worth remembering. If you want more grounded history stories that separate real records from later myths, subscribe and watch the next video, because the truth is often bigger than the legend.